Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Now, today I am joined by the amazing Pizowell. Piz, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you for asking me to come on the show.
Oh man, this is amazing to me. I've had you here now. I've never messed up your name. I've gotten it right every single time we've talked.
Mhm.
So it's an amazing thing to actually bring you here to learn how horror started for you, Piz. But before we do that, I do want to let people that don't know you get a chance to know you for a little bit. You grew up in video stores in the late 80s and 90s, which is super dope because I did the same. My mom and dad owned a mom and pop video store growing up. So I was lucky enough to be in there with the sights and smells all the time. So you also, a plethora of horror exploitation sleaze, B movies, and trash that flooded the market. These are all things that you grew up idolizing and adoring. So now let's go through like a general night at the video store. You walk in, obviously you do your YouTube thing, which is you walking up and down the aisles, looking at the cover arts, deciding which one to get. How long do you think you would usually spend in the video store trying to determine what you were going to get?
Mm. It depends. If I was flying solo, like say 90, I don't know, 96, 97, I'd say, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes to an hour, because I'd go in the video store, I'd go straight to the horror. Well, I'd check the new releases and then go straight to the horror. I had, and I've talked about this on my channel, I had one of the greatest Ma and Pa video stores here in Kentucky. If you were a horror fan, it was owned by a horror fan, and his horror section was prodigious. And he had a policy: you could rent 3 movies for $3, keep them 3 nights. I'd rent 3 movies, watch all 3 of them one night, take them back. My buddies and I, we'd go there, we'd rent 3, watch them all in one night, take them back, and get 3 more. So whether
That's
I
so awesome.
yeah. Little later on toward the end, before video stores kind of went, the way of the gun, when Jeremy would go with me, God, we'd be in there forever, because he would look through every single DVD, VHS, whatever it was, pull it off the rack, look at the front, look at the back, put it back, and just we'd be in there hours.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And for those of you that don't know, Jeremy is Piz's brother. Amazing horror fan, loves the genre, one of the sweetest men in the whole entire world. So, Jeremy, if you watch this on a replay, love you, buddy. Keep doing what you're doing, man. I love watching you and Piz on Instagram. I love the things that you guys do together. So, you're an amazing cat. And I think you're great. And thank you for being such a great horror fan. Now, you are a physical media advocate as well, something I feel like we should talk about, because if they pull your favorite movie off streaming, they're not going to come and take it off your shelf. So, how long have you been collecting physical media?
It would it go back to VHS, really. I want to say, we're talking probably late 90s, early 2000. Well, no, it would be early 2000s when I first got my first home PC, and I discovered an eBay seller. They sold VH. I don't know how they made any income off of it. They sold a VHS for like $1.99, and it was like $1 something to ship it. So I don't know how they made money off of that, but I just bought, and this had to be a former video store person, because I bought tons and tons of VHS from them. So I think that's how it started, and it helped, trust me, because like I would go to Sam Goody, which was the store in my neighborhood back in the day, that had all the new, the new Anchor Bay releases, and all the fancy DVDs and stuff. And I couldn't afford dropping $30 on a brand new DVD, so that wasn't happening. The $5 bin, that was happening. The $1.99 VHSs from eBay, that was happening. So that was how that's how it started, really.
And what's amazing about that is, obviously, we get now we get the 4K releases and stuff like that. I just got to throw in real quick. Sam Goody was in the town I grew up in too. That's where I got all my music. Obviously, like that's all my CDs and stuff were bought at Sam Goody, and that's where I got my first Slick Shoes record. Still one of my favorite records to this day.
Oh, cool.
But what did you, obviously, like I said, we got 4K stuff now, and we still got VHS stuff we can get our hands on. what is your preferred source of media?
Well, I think I want to say 4K because I want to have I want to have my favorite movies in the best possible quality. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? But there's a lot of movies that I feel like I don't really need to upgrade to DV to 4K. I'm fine with the Blu-ray. But
Alien.
the big guns, it's like, I know I own it on. I've got multiple DVDs of it. I've got multiple Blu-rays of it. Okay, I'll get the 4K, I guess. So just so I've got it in the most pristine quality possible at the
Sure.
time. So
And I still think that, movies like Alien is a movie that I still love to watch on VHS.
mm,
Um, there's something about the grain that comes with it and the darkness and the mystery. I
mhm.
don't need to see that completely enhanced in 4K. It kind of takes away from what they were going for in those moments. So there are
I
definitely certain movies that I agree with you. I don't have to upgrade to 4K on these because they were shot like this and they were meant to be seen like this. So when you enhance everything and lighten everything up, it really takes away a lot of the fear and the anxiety of it. But I'm not trying to shit on 4K, guys. No, please don't think that. I love 4K release stuff. So there's certain films I think leave them in the leave them in the VCR. Let's keep them there.
there's some movies, honestly, that the higher definition hasn't necessarily improved, because like you can like there's a movie called Madman, which is a slasher from the 80s. I love that. As soon as it hit Blu-ray, and it's especially evident on 4K, half the movie was shot out of frame or shot out of focus.
Oh my
So you never noticed that on VHS, you never noticed
right.
that on DVD. Blu-ray 4K, why is it so fuzzy? Half this movie's out of focus. Or there's a movie Sleepaway Camp, or there's a movie I love called Edge of the Axe. Like the director wanted
Yeah.
certain shots to be very dark. In high def, you see like, oh, well, that's not who there's the killer with their mask off, but that's not who the killer is at the end. Like, what?
Right. Why did they
Or
have Ricky stand in this moment? Me
exactly.
and my wife were laughing so hard. We didn't see that coming on Sleepaway Camp, and we have it on Blu-ray, and we're watching it, and we look at each other like, what the hell? What's happening here? Like,
Hmm.
and you can clearly see it's Ricky when he's
Hmm.
standing in that doorway. You're like,
Yes. Yes.
what are we doing?
Never noticed that on VHS, never noticed that on DVD. High def, that is Ricky there with like somebody or something stand behind him with long hair. You're not,
Yeah.
yeah. But the one movie that I was very hesitant to want to upgrade from even DVD was Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That's
Mhm.
my all-time favorite horror film. And for me, the first time I saw it was on an old, worn to crap VHS tape. So that just made all the grain and all the grit in that movie even grainier and grittier. And like I couldn't imagine watching that movie without the grain and the grit and but I mean and I've got that 4K pre-ordered. But yeah, like the Blu-ray releases, they've cleaned it up, but it's still there. I mean, that it still has that, like you can almost smell the heat and the
Yes.
rot, watching that movie. It's still there. That, it's, I don't know, some very very tactile about that movie that high definition didn't, clean up too much. I'm glad.
And thank God, because like you said, it gets the stigma that Texas Chainsaw is this really bloody, gory, nasty slasher film, and it's really more of an art film than anything. I love the first Texas Chainsaw too, and with that being your favorite horror movie, I promise you we'll talk about that again. But I do want to say real quick that you are also an occasional writer, producer, and actor,
Mhm.
but obviously you began here on YouTube in 2009. So for the people that don't know the Pizowell channel, what do you do over on your channel a little bit, Piz?
Oh man, it's a little bit of everything. It's pretty much mostly horror movie related. A lot of reviews of movies and Blu-ray releases. I talk about collectibles. I do unboxings. I talk a lot about physical media. Do weekly live streams. Do lots of videos with Jeremy where we, we try the newest We review like the newest flavors of soda. Jeremy's a big soda guy, or review food and stuff like that, which just right up Jeremy's alley. And everybody seems to love those videos with Jeremy. They just love Jeremy in general, which is great. So yeah,
Jeremy is a great guy. And side note, you did take Jeremy to a con earlier this year. How did that go?
We went to Scarefest last year, and it was an incredible experience. They were so good to us and to Jeremy.
Good.
I can't say enough good things about them. Scarefest has always put on a really organized, really well thought out, really well planned out show every year. I've been to I don't know how many. But they've really expanded over the past couple of years. And last year they were huge. And even with the growth, it's still just, it's like they really put a lot of thought into it, and a lot of planning into it. And it's one of the best con experiences. I've gone to much bigger cons with much bigger celebs, and there's always some issue. I've never had an issue at a Scarefest, and
That's awesome, man.
Jeremy had the time of his life. So it was such an incredible experience. But I think I may have opened up a whole new Pandora's box where he's like, we're going to Scarefest every year now.
Was that his first con?
Very first con.
I thought so. That's cool. And for those of you that don't know, obviously I met Piz through Christian Hannah Horror, through the Lost River Drive-In. So big shout out to those guys, because without them, this episode won't even be happening. I did a thing on Instagram like, hey, who would you like to see me talk to their first horror movie about? And Christian hit me up right away. I was like, dude, Piz, get Pizowell on there. Like, that would be so dope. And obviously I agreed. I reached out to you right away, and I'm really glad that we can make this connection happen. And if you guys haven't, please check out his channel. Please subscribe to it. And also make sure you're following him on social media. I have all those links right down here in the description, so you don't have to go far to find them. I promise you're not going to regret it. You're going to love the content with him and Jeremy. You're going to love all the stuff he does on his movie reviews, all the hard work he puts into all the things that he does as well. So in order for you, Piz, to take your brother to his first horror con, in order for you to collect VHSs and run a horror-themed YouTube channel, horror had to start for you somewhere. So I would like to go back to the past and talk about how horror started for you, your first horror movie. And Pizowell, your first horror movie was?
I'm wearing the shirt. It was Halloween 2. To the best of my knowledge, it was Halloween 2. That's one of my earliest memories, was watching Halloween 2 on the couch with my mom as a little kid. And it was the scene where poor Ben Tramer gets hit by the police car and then gets pinned up against the van, which is already pretty shocking enough. Then, of course, the car explodes, and we see poor Ben pinned between the car and the van, now engulfed in flames. So it was the 1-2 gut punch that to me just was like, whoa, that was awful. And then now he's in flames. That made it even worse. So that was pretty shocking to me as a kid.
And especially in that moment, obviously now as adults, it's become such a iconic moment. But the first time you see it, a part of you thinks this might be Michael, especially at a young age. I'm sure you were like,
oh, sure.
Whoa. You know what I mean? Not like, oh, that's just Ben Tramer. Like you have that moment, and obviously Loomis is going off the rails by this point anyway.
Yeah.
Do you remember about how old you were when you said you watched it with your mom?
I was a little kid. I want to say I was I don't know, 7, maybe 8, something like that. Pretty young.
And this is actually, I've never been a huge fan of the Halloween franchise. Everybody that knows me knows that. I respect the shit out of the Halloween franchise. But I came into the Halloween franchise a little late. Growing up, it was always Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Child's Play. Like, I gravitated to those. And then the first one I actually watched, which I still have a really big sweet spot for, is Halloween 5. And then I went back and I rewatched the whole franchise, and I was like, this guy's kind of boring. But now as a grown man, I'm like, Michael's probably the scariest because he's just some dude. Like, he's just your next door neighbor that snaps and goes crazy. So, I've grown, and my wife, it's her favorite franchise. So I always got to give her shit about it. So obviously with Halloween 2 is one of the movies that has universally been touted as one of the best sequels of all time. I know so many people that just don't even consider it its own. It's pretty much just a continuation of part one.
Mhm.
And we talked about, obviously the Ben Tramer scene being one of the ones that affected you the most from the film. But what would you say your favorite scene from Halloween 2 is?
There's so many. I love Halloween 2. Halloween is a better movie, but to me, Halloween 2 is more rewatchable. I watch Halloween 2. Halloween 2 is usually how I kick off the Halloween season every year, to be honest.
Sure.
I love how dark that movie is. I love how, yes, it was influenced by, some of the slashers that were coming out at the time. It needed to have a little more body count. It needed to have a little more blood, but I like that about it. There's an edge to it. There's also it's there's a mean streak to that movie too. That's definitely not in the original Halloween.
Hmm.
There's some anger there, and I think all that probably boils down to John Carpenter, who wrote it and really didn't want to be involved with it at all. But I
Right.
think in that he created, a really dark, compelling uh, story. So, I love the opening, which is just, the POVs of Michael walking through the backyards of Haddonfield before he comes upon Mr. and Mrs. Garrett's house, and he takes the knife that she's making him a ham sandwich with. Like, I love all that. That to me is just really cool. Anything that takes place in the hospital, just Michael walking around the hospital, just seeing how dark and almost abandoned that hospital is. It's kind of dreamlike to me. And people always complain like, oh, well, hospitals are never that dark and abandoned. And for me, I was telling this story on a recent stream where, like, I don't know, I seem to have spent a lot of time in hospitals as a kid because my grandmother was sick a lot.
Hmm.
And I always went on the hospital walk, where I would walk up and down the hallways.
Yep.
And they were dark. There weren't a lot of people milling about. There were people in rooms, of course, but it was quiet. It was dark. There weren't a lot of people milling about. And there, my hometown where I grew up, for some reason, they built an enormous hospital in this tiny, tiny town. And then they realized, well, we can't afford to keep half the hospital open. So we're just going to basically cordon off half of the hospital. So one day when my grandmother was in that hospital, I don't remember what for, I decided to go for a walk, and I found myself entering the abandoned zone of the hospital.
Oh man.
It was not pitch black, but it was really dark. There was nobody around, and I'm just walking around these hallways, and I can hear Michael breathing. I can hear the dun, 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 and it was the part two, more
Yeah.
yeah, it's synthy theme. And so yeah, I always go, well, I've been in some pretty dark abandoned hospitals. So
Right.
um so yeah, I don't know. There's so much I like about that movie. I don't know if I can pick just one scene. The opening is great. I love just about anything in the hospital. Of course, the hot tub scene is pretty memorable. um I don't know. Again, I just love that movie's got such an edge and such kind of a mean streak to it, and a darkness to it that I don't know. I like that.
Well, and I've always said that for me personally, one of the most redeeming qualities of Halloween 2 is the kills.
Mhm,
You go, this is probably one of the more, especially in the original Carpenter movies, this is probably the most brutal we get from Mike.
mhm,
And some of the kills that he has in this movie, whether it's like you said, the hot tub, or one of the most iconic kills of all time, besides hanging the guy on the door, Bob, you get the nurse, lifting the nurse up from the
oh,
back. Which
uh,
kill from the film, besides Ben Tramer, obviously, would you say was your favorite of the
I
film?
I like that hypodermic to the eye, where the lady backs up after she sees Dr. Mixter dead in the chair, and you
Hmm.
get that same kind of reveal over the shoulder like from the first movie, and Michael grabs her and just puts the hypodermic in her eye. I really like that one. That one, that's a good one. But I also wanted to point out one other thing too. I love Dick Warlock as
Mhm.
Michael. I
Yeah.
love he's very stiff, but that made it kind of like he's inhuman. Where Nick Castle kind of he would kind of glide, and he Warlock is just he's demonic. I love that, and I love the way the mask looked
Mhm.
on Warlock too. It had that stretch to it that made it, I think, look really just it narrowed the eyes,
Yeah.
and it just made him look. It made the shape look far more sinister and menacing.
He's a lot more intimidating in the second chapter for
Mhm,
sure. 100%.
mhm.
Now, obviously, we're talking about this is a second chapter, and this is a chapter that's up to 13 chapters now. That's how many Halloween films that we have.
Wow.
With it being part of a franchise, I always ask the same question. Halloween 2 was your first horror movie, but what is your favorite horror movie in the Halloween franchise itself?
I would have to go with two, and and
Mm,
and I love three, I love four, I love five. When I would go to the video store back in the day, I can't tell you how many times I rented four and five together.
mhm.
It's like you couldn't watch one without the other,
Right.
and I'd watch them back to back. Um, I love six. I love six to death. Both cuts of six. So I think the first six Halloweens, I love them all, tremendously. Beyond that, they kind of ebb and flow. But the first six can do no wrong in my book. But if I had to pick one that's the absolute favorite, it would be two.
Okay. And that's perfectly fair. And I talked earlier about how we were going to come back to it, and now's the time in my script, Piz, where we got to come back to it. We talked about your first horror movie being Halloween 2 and what that movie means to you, and I know the answer, but since it's in my script, I got to ask. My buddy Ghostface is here, and he has a question for you.
Okay.
What's your favorite scary movie, Pizowell? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
Well, my favorite horror movie of all time is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That one, I think there's a couple of different reasons. Aside from, I think it's an incredible. I think it's not just a landmark horror movie, but really a landmark independent film.
Yeah.
But when I was a kid at the video store, for the longest time, I was limited to what I could rent. If I wanted to rent a movie, I had to take my mom the box. She'd have to peruse it, the front and the back. If it didn't look too ghastly and gory and gruesome, then she'd allow it. If it did look ghastly and gory and gruesome, it got the hand. And what was funny was when I was around, I don't know, probably 8, 9, all those parameters were lifted. I could rent anything I wanted except the Texas Chainsaw Massacre,
Oh,
because she said, I don't want you watching a movie about people getting cut up with a chainsaw. So that already put something in my mind about the movie.
yeah.
So it wasn't until I was in high school before I finally rented the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And at that point, I'd seen everything,
Yeah.
just about everything. And I took that movie home and I watched it, and it just blew my freaking mind. Like I said, the tactile qualities of that movie, the look of it, it's like, I don't know, watching that movie, you feel the heat, you smell the rot, like you can smell all the like it's like, every character in that van, they stink because they've been in that van all day and they're sweating and they're nasty. Um, it's just kind of it's an uncomfortable movie. It's a movie with it's the kind of movie that just builds and builds and builds and builds, and then it just ends like that, and it doesn't give you a time to decompress. um you know it the characters, Leatherface, of course, the house, everything about it to me is just an incredible piece of art. And I think a lot of people say, well, like, oh, Psycho was the first slasher movie, or whatever. To me, I mean, Chainsaw is the Citizen Kane of slasher movies.
Okay.
That created the prototype. You've got the young people taken out of their element. You've got the killer with the mask and their implement of choice, or their trademark implement. You've got the final girl. You've got the final chase. You've got all that is that started with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So without Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you know, I don't know if we would have gotten Halloween. Without Halloween, I don't know if we would have. And Texas Chainsaw Massacre also created this enormous, you know, what Friday the 13th did for horror in the 80s, Chainsaw did for horror in the drive-ins of the 70s.
Yeah.
Everybody wanted to capitalize on what Chainsaw was doing at the drive-in. So you got the Toolbox Murders, you got, you know what I mean, all these
Pieces.
Yeah, exactly. All these movies that were inspired by Texas Chainsaw Massacre to do what it did at the drive-in. So yeah, without Chainsaw, we wouldn't have gotten a lot of those great 70s, you know, trashy at the drive-in movies. And there's a very good possibility we wouldn't have got Halloween. And if we didn't get Halloween, we wouldn't have got Friday the 13th, and God knows what the 80s would have looked like without that.
Right. Well, and that's just a fact. Victor Miller's come straight out saying he wanted to rip off Halloween and Psycho. He wanted to add those two movies together to make Friday the 13th. So, I mean, there's no denying the influence that Halloween had on that. And obviously, without Halloween, we don't get Halloween 2. If we don't get Halloween 2, Pizowell might not be a horror fan. So, I mean, like, everything's a butterfly effect. You know, without that, watching that movie for the first time, who knows what trajectory your life would have gone in. So,
and one of the, if I could add one thing, one of the greatest things about Chainsaw, and people have talked about this, and it was like my mother said, I don't want you watching a movie about people getting cut up with a chainsaw. You don't actually see anybody get cut up with a chainsaw. You see Leatherface sawing, but you don't, it's like you don't see blood. You don't see limbs flying off. You see Leatherface put someone onto the meat hook, but you don't see the meat hook going through them. There's very little blood in that movie at all. It's all a mood. It's all just, it gets in your head. And, you know, people swear, oh yeah, I saw the hook go through her. No, you didn't, because it didn't happen. You know, oh, I swear I saw him cut Franklin's head off. No, you didn't, because it didn't happen. For a movie to get in your head that deep, that it makes you think you've seen things that weren't there.
You connect dots that aren't there.
What other movie has ever done that?
Right.
You know,
dude, it's amazing. It's so funny you say that, because we've talked about that on the podcast before. Like, the influence that, you know, Chainsaw has is legendary. Because people, like I was saying earlier, they think of this movie as this nasty, bloody, gory slasher, and it really isn't. It's there's not a lot of blood. There's very little gore. I mean, you got the dinner scene, which is gross and uncomfortable and anxiety filled, but it's not bloody and disgusting, and, you know, like the later entries of the franchise are. I think that they caught lightning in a bottle with Chainsaw, and I've said that numerous times. They were very lucky, and this goes on to the crew and the cast as well, for all the shit they went through in that house. And there was dedication. You know, they all were going through it. You know, Gunnar had to get up and puke during scenes because it was so hot and uncomfortable and stinky. And that's dedication, man. Like, that's why Texas Chainsaw Massacre is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because of the cast and the crew and all the shit they went through. And they still did it with a smile, because they knew they were creating something that was going to be cemented in art forever. So that's Texas Chainsaw. For as bad as I dislike the franchise as a whole, that first movie it's impossible not to put it in your top 10, man. It's so good. Overall, the franchise I could do without. But I think that first one is just such an amazing standalone film that it's worth everything you get from it. So, man, Piz, I've had an amazing time with you, but before I let you go, we always bounce back to the same question. What we're going to do is we're going to go back to Halloween 2, and we're going to rank it on a skull count. Now, we're not judging this movie on acting, production, score, nothing like that. We're not being critics. What we're doing here, Piz, is we're strictly judging this movie on how much it affected you on your first viewing. So 0 skulls being not effective, 5 being extremely effective. You can use half and quarter skulls anywhere in the middle. Piz, what would your ranking of Halloween 2 be?
It's got to be a 5, because again, like I can see myself sitting on the couch next to mom. I remember the placement of the couch in the living room. I remember the placement of the TV in the living room. I remember I remember watching it, and I'm sure my jaw was on the floor the whole time.
Yeah.
So for it to have impacted me like that much at that early age, that I've got like a snapshot of it in my brain. That's a 5 for sure.
It has to be, man. And I'm so glad that you did, because you become a major influence on a lot of different people. And I was going to ask you, man, what's Jeremy's favorite horror movie? Does he have a favorite?
I would say it shifts occasionally, but I think the top three, and on any given day, he would probably say either of these three. One would be Candyman. Um, then there'd be Nightmare on Elm Street, and then there'd be Child's Play.
Dude, three classics, man. And that, Jeremy is a man with exquisite taste. So let him know that his taste is impeccable, man. He's a man of culture, and I appreciate it.
It's very true.
No shit, man. Child's Play, I've said it 1,000 times, and people laugh at me. Child's Play is my favorite horror franchise. It always has been. It always will be. I think it's just an amazing franchise, and so I'm glad that we were able to do this, man. And
Yeah.
I just want everybody to know, before we let you go, man, we're at the end of the third act. The credits are about to roll. The curtain's about to drop. You need to make sure you're following Piz on social media and subscribing to the YouTube channel. I promise you, if you're not doing it already, you're missing out. Piz is a great guy. He does a lot of great things with his brother that you get to watch, and he's a true, genuine lover of horror. So make sure you're subscribing to the YouTube channel. Make sure you're following him on social media. Piz, don't go anywhere. I got a couple more questions for you.
Sure.
Everybody else, as always, if you haven't already, make sure you like, subscribe, and follow us on social media as well. And until next time, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.